Hello and welcome to the Swan Song Podcast. My name is Ben Buddy Slack and I'm the founder of the Swan Song Project and the host of this podcast. Swan Song Project is a charity. We're based here in Leeds, England, and we help people who are terminally ill or bereaved to write and record songs. We believe in celebrating lives, making memories and leaving legacies. If you'd like to find out more about the charity, you can visit our website, which is swansongproject.co.uk. The podcast features songwriters. Each episode I have a different songwriter on. I ask them to share with us one of their songs. We talk about how they wrote it. I ask them for a songwriting tip, and I also ask them for a song that's meaningful to them in some way relating to bereavement. This episode features Sam Carter. Sam's a great songwriter, musician, incredible guitar player, and he's got some really interesting songs. And we talk in quite a lot of detail about some of the complexities and depth to some of these songs, particularly these songs about bereavement that we deal with in this episode. I think you're really going to enjoy it. There's lots of really interesting stuff in it. If you do, please consider liking and sharing and subscribing to the podcast. We've got lots more great episodes coming up that you're not going to want to miss, including episode 100, which is coming out soon, which is going to feature two people who have written songs through the project. So rather than professional songwriters, it's going to feature some people who have come to the Swan Song Project for us to help them write songs, and they're going to share their experiences of what that's been like, and you're going to hear some of their songs. So you're not going to want to miss episode 100 when that comes out. But before then, enjoy Sam Carter on the Swan Song Podcast. Okay, today I'm here with Sam Carter. Thanks for joining me, Sam.
Hi, thanks for having me.
No, I'm really looking forward to talking to you. So this is the Swan Song Podcast. For anyone new to the show, every episode I have a different songwriter on. We do it in three sections. So first we're going to have one of Sam's songs. I'm going to talk about how he wrote it. In section 2, I'll ask Sam for a songwriting tip. And then in section 3, we're going to talk about a song that's meaningful to Sam in some way relating to bereavement. So over to you, Sam. Which song of yours have you chosen to talk to us about first today?
I've chosen to talk to you about Here in the Ground, first of all.
Brilliant. So we'll have a listen to that now. This is Here in the Ground by Sam Carter.
Here in the ground where the family laid her under the cross that her father had made her, 3 years young, and she's been and gone, and they won't be the same again. Had raised her while they were lost in a battle to save her. Looking on was the younger son, and he won't be the same again.
Okay, brilliant. So that was Here in the Ground. Yeah, it's a powerful, very moving song. Sam, what can you tell us about the writing of it?
Well, I wrote that song almost 20 years ago now,
Oh,
and
wow.
it was a very important time for me in terms of my songwriting and learning how to be a songwriter. I just discovered I was living in London at the time, and I just sort of started to really go deep into folk and traditional music, and that was starting to really influence the way that I wrote songs. And I've been writing songs, consistently up to that point for the last, for a long time. But that was when it started to something started to come together. Um, when I was listening to traditional songs and just thinking, I just loved the sort of the narrative aspect of it and the sort of documentary aspect of it. And not all songs are kind of purely documentary. There's also drama and sensational stuff in there as well. But there is a lot of real life and ordinary life coming across in folk music. And I found that so compelling. I found it so compelling that it was so specific and so detailed about particular events, particular people in history, often, working people, ordinary people, not kings and queens and so on, although there are some kings and queens as well. And that was really interesting. And I kind of realized, or the way that I was inspired by that was thinking, hey, I can write about my own life. I can write about what's going on for me and the people that I know. And that if I can capture that in a kind of clear way, that will be compelling. I had just had faith that it was going to somehow work. And so that Here in the Ground is the title track to the first EP that I made. And that song is, I basically tried to write as just clearly and as in a sort of unfiltered way as I could about the fact that my sister died when I was very young. So I had an older sister called Sarah Jane, who was about 3 years old when she died, and I would have been around 18 months at the time. And I don't have much of a conscious memory of her, but it's a huge part of my family story and my family history. It's something that, was a huge thing for my mum and dad, as you can imagine. And it's a big part of my growing, my sort of world growing up, and a very sad thing to have happened. And I always knew I would write about it at some point, but it was something to do with this learning about folk music and how all that stuff works, and the fact that I felt like I'd got permission from folk music, if you like, to just tell my story, just as me, not trying to be anything more than I am, but just to be me. And so I just wrote it. I just wrote these in the most simple way that I could, here in the ground, where the family laid her under the cross that her father had made her. And that is what happened. My dad made a cross for my sister. He's a carpenter, or used to do a lot of woodworking stuff. And that was it. Once I'd written those lines, I thought, wow, like that, there's so much power in just telling the truth, in music. And I know the way that people still react to that now at gigs, that the honesty of it kind of really captures people, and they connect to their own grief because of that. They connect to their own experience. They don't have to have had that specific experience to really relate to it. And that's the magic for me. It's like, when I tell my story, it allows people to feel a resonance with their story. It's not that they hear it and they think, oh man, this guy's going on about himself, I wish he'd,
Yeah.
It's the opposite. Some people think that. They think, oh no, it's self-indulgent to talk about yourself. No, it's not. If you put it in the right light, if you give people their way into what you're talking about, so you show them the images, and you almost give them a film to watch as you're, by painting the images and the story and so on, then I think people can find their own stuff in that. And so that song is really important to me, because it was when I felt like, obviously it's a huge thing in my life that I wanted to write about, but it was the first time where I felt like I'd put that into this sort of folk narrative form, and it was like a lightning bolt. It was like, wow, that works for me, and I think it works for the audience as well. And people even now come up to me and say they still think that's their favorite song of mine that I've written. So I'm really, it's very dear to me, that song. And yeah, and it really set me off on continuing to do what I do today. Really, it's the blueprint has I've done different styles and so on over the years, but the blueprint is still the same, which is try and capture a slice of life, whether that's love or loss or whatever it is, and try and be truthful about it, and have faith that will resonate with people. And yeah, that's it. It's as simple as
that. Yeah, it's a powerful song, Sam, and yeah, well done for writing it and being able to go into something like that and process it through the song. What was your songwriting like before this then? So what was the Sam Carter songs like before you had this kind of shift?
I think I was trying to write those sorts of songs, but I was a little bit, I'd grown up with a lot of rock and alternative music and stuff like that, and I there's not to say there's not truth in that music as well, but we tend to work, you tend to work a lot in sort of metaphors, and things can be a bit more vague and a bit more sort of, interesting images and ideas and so on. But I often felt like me writing it, I'm not saying it's the same for anybody else, but I felt a bit guarded, like I was sort of trying to hide behind sort of clever sounding ideas, but I wasn't really like saying it, and I just, when I heard folk music, I just thought, you can just say it. You don't have to beat around the bush, so I think before it was a little bit more, I grew up listening to stuff like Nirvana and Green Day and Placebo and Foo Fighters, and that was at least a big part of my music when I was a teenager. I also did classical guitar, and I was into blues and other stuff as well, but it was kind of the rock and grunge thing that was really getting me in my teens, and so my writing was sort of revolving around that. And then I gradually started to migrate to things like Bob Dylan and Neil Young and Nick Drake and Martin Carthy and John Martin. I started to go a little bit more towards the English singer-songwriter thing from the American singer-songwriter thing. Because Pearl Jam, they were quite big fans of Neil Young, and he kind of influenced the grunge thing. And Neil Young's kind of is a bit grungy, but he's a songwriter, and he's comes from the sort of folky narrative tradition, I guess, if you go far enough back. And Bob Dylan similarly, and then that's not that far away from Martin Carthy. And so I ended up kind of doing this sort of down the line, and ended up with the sort of folkier stuff that I do now. And that was just what seemed to fit for me, so yeah, that's how it sort of progressed.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And what was I going to say then? Yeah, I can relate to what you're saying about those other kind of genres where sometimes there is an element of guardedness to you, and there's an elementness. I think there's a bit of like swagger in a lot of in some genres that kind of where it's like, so it feels like the singer isn't as open and vulnerable as a folk singer might be. And yeah, that's what I was saying, is that like for this to be your first song going into that one, to deal with such a big event in your life straight off, feels like quite a brave thing, rather than like, well, I'll write a folk song, but it might be about something fairly low key, but you've kind of went for a good heavy one straight away, didn't you?
They weren't all like that, but that was definitely one where I just sort of, I went in deep, I think, early on, and that was it. I thought, that works for me. And not every song's going to be that, and swagger's great too, and the performing, being a big, entertaining performer and all that stuff, and not everybody can or wants to go to that place in their music making. Sometimes it is, David Bowie or something. It's fantastic. He's got this sort of real character to the way he performs, and that's cool as well. That's just a totally different way of making music, and people can still find stuff that really inspires and resonates with them within that. But for me, it was the folk thing that felt like home. And I guess, whatever music you make, you're just trying to find that on you, something that resonates for you. So
Yeah. And what was it like sharing it when you first started? When you first done it, what was it like when you first started sharing it with people?
Yeah, it was. I played it to people who knew me and knew the story, and they were really moved by it. I can remember sending it to, sending it out to people, and they were pretty knocked out by it. And I think partly because of that, there's no there's no skin on it, there's no sort of fat on it at all. It's just bang, and I think it took some people aback, but again, in a way that sort of very often connects people with their own. I mean, even now, when I sing the song at gigs and I introduce it, I just feel this change in the mood. And I don't think it's like, oh God, I can't bear to listen to this. It's people connecting to some kind of loss or experience that they've had. They're not thinking about me, they're thinking about it's taking them somewhere with themselves. And I think it's important as songwriters to sort of, we can take people on those journeys, and it's a bit of a responsibility as well, because you can affect people quite strongly, by what you're doing. And so I tend to always, I'll play something like that, and then I'll play something lighthearted and bring people back out of that frame of mind again, because we can't stay there all the time. Generally the reaction to it's been really good, and if anybody thought it's rubbish, they haven't told me. So they've kept it to themselves. Yeah.
You kind of answered my next question as well. I was going to ask. So again, I'm a big fan of like songs that are, deep and like deal with like very often your difficult issue. But I guess I like songs that kind of, I feel there's like a real bravery, isn't there, in songs that deal with things that are difficult and are complicated, and so I really love that. But then sometimes when I'm doing gigs and I'm playing them, I do kind of think like, it is that balance, isn't it, of like how many of these can you do in a set if it's going to be. I think I had a phase where I was just writing all songs that were like that, and I just do gigs and I'd be like, yeah, maybe that was a bit much, and I need to have a bit of light and shade to it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way I think of it. I think of it as a show and a journey, and I think of it as a bit like a film, so you always have that moment in the film where it's peril, it's like, are they going to make it? How's it going to work out? The third act, it gets dark and things start to go wrong, and you just got to think about where you want to start and where you want to go and where you want to lead people. But I think over the course of the set, I think for me, if I've got something that takes people low and then it takes them high, and then you kind of just want to create a bit of a journey. And as long as it's not, I think whatever, if it's all at one level, whatever that one level is, I think that's less effective. So if it's all upbeat stuff, then there's nothing to contrast with it to come back up to, sort of thing. You kind of need the ebb and flow. But definitely I can empathize with you, and I've gone through phases myself where I've written a bunch of those songs at once. I've been going through something or whatever, and I think that for me there is that remembering that even though my music is me, I don't feel like there's too much of a sort of character that I'm in when I'm on stage. It's still a role and a performance role, and I've got my own personal life and stuff that I go through, and I put that into my songs. But when I'm up there, I'm a performer. And so I think about a certain amount of distance between the two things, even though because of what I write about, sometimes it doesn't feel like there's any distance, but I still think about that, like, okay, well, I've got my personal life and stuff that's going on, but I'm getting up to do a gig for these people, and it's up to you as a writer how much of that crossover you want there to be, and some days I just don't want to be there so much, I just want to perform my songs and play well, and that's enough as well. I think, it's not like to be a great songwriter, you always have to be giving all of yourself all of the time. In terms of your personal life, obviously you're giving yourself to the performance, but I think people understand that, and that's what's going going on. You know, gigs aren't therapy. You know, I think they can be therapeutic for people, for the audience. You know, but they're not it's not a song. You know, it's not like I'm getting up there and I'm sharing absolutely everything. And I think there is a line there. You know, and I don't know, I'll cross that sometimes. You know, but you're always trying to find that sort of line between being you and being real, and being sort of an entertainer and guiding the shape of a gig, to keep, you know, to sort of live within that framework of a show, and not just being, you know, there is, you know, it does happen sometimes. You get those moments where people sort of overshare on stage, you know, and but that's subjective as well. You know, maybe for the one person there that night, that moment was the best moment of the whole show, you know. So yeah,
and that some people, like, you know, one of the songs might have been just what they need to hear, and another one might be for someone else. So like, if there was a set that's all kind of quite heavy stuff, some people might love individual bits, but the audience on a whole might be not able to take it all in. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, it can be the individual songs might all have individual impacts on a great level, but the whole set might be hard for a whole audience to take in. One of my friends made me laugh. He said he's got he has two separate, like, you know, acts that he puts music out as, and he said one of them is just purely his as miserable as he wants to be, to write whatever he wants and puts it out as that name. Then his like gigging act, he's like, we have an agreement in the band that I have to do some less sad songs, to give the audience something. I thought that was quite a good way of doing it. If this is my act, where I don't think he gigs that stuff at all. I think that is just an outlet for him.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to do it, and I think that songwriting as therapy thing, and songwriting as a performing songwriter, I think it's fine to have two separate sort of categories in your mind for that, and maybe two separate acts, or you know, these are the songs that I play in this context, and these are the songs that I play in this context. Both of those are totally valid, and I write for myself a lot. You know, some of those songs that I write for myself make it out into the world, and some of them are just for me, and that's okay. And they're as valuable to me as the ones that I play to people. You know, yeah.
So how does your writing work in general? Do you have like a regular practice, and do you have do you work, you know, from inspiration, or do you have things that you're kind of working towards? And I guess what I was thinking there was, when you're writing like a new album, for example, do you bear in mind, like, well, I've written 2 songs now that are fairly heavy or fairly, you know, upbeat ones, and I want to have a bit of, you know, do you write with that variety in mind?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll just say case in point. So I've just been writing an album called Silver Horizon. That's my album that's coming up, and that was a case of, you know, initially I go through an exploring kind of period. I'm not consciously thinking about an album that's being written. You know, it's just I'm trying to write as consistently as I can. And at some point, I realize it's time to start making an album, you know. And at that point, I think, you know, so perhaps when you've got, you know, 5 or 6 things or whatever, you're starting to think, oh, well, I've got a lot of stuff that does this sort of thing, or, you know, like it's downbeat, or it's all in a major key, or it's all in this time signature, or something like that. And I'll start to think a bit more critically. I don't mean in a negative way, but just a bit more sort of analyze, okay, well, again, to give this album a bit of a shape and a bit of a story, what can I add to that would give some contrast and give it the shape that I kind of want it to have, you know, that will be a journey for the listener that's not all kind of one level. But I do find that happens fairly naturally for me, that I'm not always in the same mood. So you know, sometimes I write really upbeat stuff, and sometimes I write more downbeat stuff, and yeah, it does tend to kind of work like that. I think one of the interesting things is for me is where you, I mean, it's the cliche because it's what everybody always asks you at gigs, you know, which comes first, the music or the lyrics. And have you had that yourself? I think you probably, you know,
many times, yeah.
But, yeah. So, and it's a funny question because I think for most songwriters, it's not as simple as that. It's a bit of both and maybe neither. But I've really, you know, in the past, it's often been, it's always been a mix, but I guess with these sort of folky narrative type songs, it does tend to be, oh, I'm going to write about X, or I start writing about X and I realize what I'm writing about, you know, a relationship or whatever it is, and then I carry on from that point, and I try to make the music fit where the story goes. You know, if it's a happy story, then it's a happy, etc. But with this new album, I kind of started with a sound. I had this electric guitar sound in mind that I was kind of exploring that for the first time, and I took a few weeks just to really get into, okay, well, what could I do with electric guitar and my songwriting style that might be a bit different from the sort of acoustic fingerpicky stuff that I'm generally sort of have done in the past. And I sort of let the sound inspire where I wanted to go with the lyrics. So I guess I had a bunch of things that were on my mind and that I wanted to write about. And then I started to kind of come up with these riffs and chord progressions and ideas. And while I was sort of jamming away with, you know, I ended up sort of jamming a lot and then just sort of coming up with melodies, improvising melodies. And at a certain point, it just felt like, oh, I know what this mood is evoking for me. So, you know, I'm thinking about this situation that's going on for me or for somebody that I know, because it just feels like the right music for that mood, you know. And then I would write out of that inspiration, if you like. So in a way, it was almost like back to front from that usual process of, I will write a song about X and then I'll make some music that suits the mood of the subject that I'm writing about. Whereas this was, I'm going to just play and I'm going to come up with stuff, and then I'm going to see where that inspires me to go lyrically. I've got some ideas for where I want to go lyrically, but I'm going to connect that to this music. And for me, that's meant the song sound, to me, I don't know if you have to listen to yourself, but the songs have changed. You know, there's a different sound to the songs this time, and I think that's a result of changing up my process. And I do try to do that because I think if you write in the same process, you'll get the same results a lot of the time. So I think to try and keep yourself inspired and keep it fresh, you have to sort of do something you know, if you want to write a song you've not written before, you have to start with a process you've not tried before, you know, and lots of great ways to do that. But I think for me, this has been an experiment on this album that I feel has paid off, because I've pushed myself to write things that I don't think I would have written if I'd have started with, okay, well, this is the subject, let's just make some music that fits for that subject, which is a great way to be able to work. But yeah, so that's been the difference this time, I think. But coming back to what you were saying before, you mentioned something, I think, about, you know, talking a bit about, you know, do you have a practice, are you consistent? Yeah, so I go through phases where I'm chugging away at it, plugging away at it. I don't sit and wait for inspiration to strike, because now, to be honest, I find it doesn't. I know that sounds funny to say, but what I mean is, it's rare that I'll just be sitting around and I'll suddenly think, oh, I'm going to write a song about X. It's much more common that I'm doing some sort of journaling or sort of free writing to think about something, to kind of process something that's going on in my head, or I'll be picking a guitar lick or whatever, you know, I'll be picking something, and that will inspire me. You know, I'll go off and make a coffee, and then an idea will come into my head or whatever. So I think inspiration comes in the process of working on stuff. So as long as I'm working on stuff, I'll find inspiration within that. But it's, you know, as they say, kind of motivation follows action and not the other way around. You know, it's not like you suddenly go, oh man, I'm going to write a great song, and then you go and do it. That doesn't really happen for me now. I guess because I do it, you know, it's something I do for a job. So it's perhaps not the same as if you're doing it as a you know, outside of that context, because you know, you kind of, not that you have to do it, but nobody's making me do it. But it's it's something you kind of have to do consistently. You know how it works now with the having to get new stuff out there, and I love having new stuff to play as well. So I kind of have to treat it a little bit methodically. But for me, I find that makes it more fun than sitting waiting around for inspiration, which, sure, like sometimes you read something or something moves you and you take that into your songwriting process, but it's way more likely to happen if I'm already trying to work on something and thinking about the process of songwriting and practicing and doing all that stuff. For me personally, that's how it works these days.
Yeah, that's really good, Sam. What just popped into my head then, as you were saying about that, I feel like I've had phases where I'm consistent and I have a schedule where I write regularly, and I have other phases where I don't. And when I'm in the schedule, I don't tend to get those random spots of inspiration as much. But when I'm not consistently writing, I do. And it was just dawning with then as you were talking about it, whether it's like, when you've got that time, then your creativity knows it's got a space to explore. And when you're not giving it that, it's like that's when things would kind of get me. And then it would frustrate me because I'd be like, I'd be doing something, I'd be like, oh, that might be an interesting idea, actually, something like that. And then I wouldn't have the space to give it time. So then it would kind of frustrate me more when I've got the time, like, oh, well, I can play with that. Whether there's something in that of like when you the creative part of your mind knows it's got a space to do it, it means it doesn't have to worry about it as much. Or whether it banks things, like obviously you can always get an inspiration, but whether it's like it can be stored, it's like we can deal with that when we're next at the desk or something.
Yeah, I know what you mean, and I know lots of people for whom they will say, as soon as you get that moment, you have to go. Whether it's time to be writing or not, you have to go and you have to write it, and that's valid. And if that sometimes that was how I work, as like if I get inspired in the middle of the day or something, then I would definitely follow that. But I find it doesn't. For me, it's like I'll work on something for a bit and I might get stuck and I'm like, oh, man, I can't figure this out. And then I'll go for a walk or I'll, go to the pub with my friends, and then I'll wake up the next morning and I'll be like, okay, I got it. I've got how that's going to work. And there's something between that ebb and flow of working on something and focusing and then forgetting about it for a bit and letting your mind just sort of play with it in the background and not consciously thinking about it. But because again, sort of what you were talking about, because you're going to come back the next day and you've got an hour, then I think your brain just kind of like, it keeps working on it. Whereas if you don't have that, if you don't like make a little commitment with yourself to come back regularly, that for me personally, everyone's different. It doesn't happen as much. Where if I know, it's a bit like, when I'm a guitar teacher as well. I teach at Leeds, actually. I teach at Leeds Conservatoire. I know that regular accountability for students, and as a learner myself still, if you know that next Friday, your teacher's going to be saying to you, what have you got this week? You're going to have something, right? Because there's that accountability. And I think as a songwriter, it's, on our own, I think it's creating that for yourself. So if it's like, next Friday, I'm going to do another hour. And I think in the background of my mind, it's going like, yeah, well, I'm watching situations in the world. I'm talking to my friends. I'm kind of, the stuff bubbling up there that could be ripe for inspiration, because I know I've got that hour, and and it's a great thing, right? If you've got any time in life at all now, I mean, you said you've got a little one now. If you've got an hour to write a song, that's golden, right? So I think your brain's personally, my brain is ready for it when I've got time to do that. So
yeah, definitely. What was so you said about how you'd often be, lyrics stories kind of first approach, and this time you've done it the opposite way around, and obviously switching to an electric guitar. What was it like then how did the lyrics come about, I guess, do you say, would it be like a feeling you'd get from the music, or is it still quite narrative? Would the stories come from the music, or?
Yeah, well, I think, so I always have some ideas of stuff that I wanted to write about, and I might have that written down so I've got a journal, I've got a couple of different books that I just keep here around that I'll I'll just write, and there might be a subject that's on my mind, and I'll just write some stuff about it. And I'm not thinking about it as a song at that point. I'm just thinking I want to get something down about this situation that's happening, or this thing I've read in the news, or whatever it is. And then if the following week, when I'm sat there with my electric guitar, I come up with this, perhaps what I'm writing about is, I'm angry about something that's going on in the world, and then a week later I write an angry riff. I'm thinking, well, okay, well, there's two things that could work really well together there, and I'll improvise that melody, and then I'll start to think about, I might go back to the journal I've been writing in, and think there's some things in there that I can pick out that might be a focal point for that anger and that energy, and then I'll kind of go from there and develop a lyric out of that. It's just the other way around to do it, rather than starting with a lyric idea and then, okay, we'll take that to the guitar. What melody would work for that lyric? I would say I haven't found it's better or worse. It's just different, and different's good sometimes.
Yeah.
And so that's generally been my process. But I can always, we all are, right? Music is so moving. Just a simple chord progression can just really hit me emotionally. And then often when I get in that space, I see things, man. I mean, I can visualize a situation, or off the back of that emotion, and that's very personal to me and what I've experienced in the last week or whenever it's been, and I then tend to take that into making lyrics out of it. So yeah, but I think it's that love of music that keeps me going, really, is because it's I can hear two chords and just be so captured by that. And I don't think there's any form that I've ever found that has that immediate emotional reaction, when it's just like bang, you hear something and it just floors you, and it might be just instrumental, there might even be no lyrics, but it just sort of sparks something in you. And I guess it's that is the starting point. It's like, I come up with a chord progression, I'm like, whoa, there's something about that that's just captured something. And then I'll start to think about, well, what is that mood? And is there something recently that's been, looking at my journal, is there something that fits with that mood? Mm-hmm. It sounds a bit calculating, but it is in a way. But to me, that's, the best songs that I've heard, and the songs that I love are those, you kind of think, the music is perfect for those lyrics. The way it sets those lyrics up is just, it's totally the right mood. I don't know, I think of whatever great song you want to mention, but they work together in tandem, and the music pushes the lyrics to have more meaning, and the lyrics push the music. And that's kind of what I'm after, is like, I want those two things to work together. And I think that's something you can work at, from a very simple starting point, and it's not always the case, because Move On Up by Curtis Mayfield is a really positive song, but it's also in a minor key, for example. But generally speaking, minor chords have a sad sound, and major chords have a happy sound. That's just a very blunt starting point, but it's, everybody knows that. So it's refining your sense of that, really, because there's more levels of that to go into, tempos and feels and timbre and sound, and your touch on the instrument and all that stuff can change how it feels emotionally when you hear that stuff, and so I think as a songwriter, it's just being awake to the possibilities of that, maybe all I need to do to make this have a different mood is not pluck the strings right in the middle of near the pickups on the guitar, but go right close to the bridge where it's got that really, sort of harder sound, and that suddenly it's like an angrier sounding riff, and that suits what I'm singing about at the moment. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm going off on one now, but that's how I think about it.
Yeah, that's all really good. Yeah, and it's all like I was thinking, it's the more experience you get, the more the more you're aware of the tricks, I guess. And like you can learn lots of different tricks, can't you? Like I think with a lot of people starting out, it's very instinctual a lot of time, isn't it? Of like, oh, this just sounds right to me, and then, but then it's
Yeah,
like the further you get, it's like still keeping that intuitive guide. And so sometimes it's like you say, you might be like, well, and it can be something really subtle, as you mentioned there. Like, well, this song just, it could maybe it sound better like this, and making a slight change. And sometimes that just happens naturally, isn't it? And sometimes it can be, sometimes you can get more aware of like, oh, well, I'll just do this. This will make it sound more like that, and it can be one of those really subtle changes.
yeah,
So yeah, just having
yeah,
those,
yeah, absolutely. But I
having
think,
the awareness of the things.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think also instinct is 100% what it's about. I mean, I think you've just got to follow your instinct, and it's just that you refine. I found that I've refined that instinct as time's gone on, because I've done it more times than 20
Yeah.
years ago when I wrote that song that I was talking about before. But I still, when I'm sort of listening to a riff that I've come up with and thinking about how that feels emotionally, that's an instinct. It's not, nobody's
Yeah.
got a right answer about that. It's just, it's how you respond. So it's just being having a kind of sensitivity, really. I think that's what it is. It's just staying switched on, and
Yeah.
that's hard, because it's staying switched on to, it's getting very sort of therapeutic now, but how you're feeling, if you can stay switched on to how you're feeling and how you're responding to things in the world, I just find that there's a never ending supply of stuff to, you're always going through, you're anxious, or you're worried, or you're excited, or you're happy about something, or whatever it is, in the course of a day, there's so much stuff going on, and all of that is, for me, is fair game for songwriting. Not to say that life is just a raw material for songwriting. It's even more important than that. But there's stuff going on all the time to write about, if you can just keep your ears open and your eyes open.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, thanks, Sam. Let's move into section 2 now, shall we? This is what I asked my guests for a songwriting tip. And again, what I started doing at the start of this section is preaching that, like, what often happens with the podcast is we have the first section where we talk about writing, and loads of great tips come out in that, and then I ask for a specific tip afterwards. So what would your specific tip be for us today, Sam?
Okay, so my specific tip for today would be to try and think about your lyrics the way that you think about chords. So we always think of chords as being in a particular key. So for those of us that have maybe played a little bit, will know that, a C chord will go really well with an F chord and a G chord, because they're all in the same key, and that sounds good. But lyrics kind of work in a similar way. So if you're writing a song about, let's say you're writing a song about the C, the actual C, S-E-A. It's probably a bad thing to choose. Yeah, not the C chord.
Although you can write a great song about the C chord. It's a good chord.
The C chord is a hell of a chord. Yeah, it's a great chord. Then you can think about the language that will work with C. So we can think about tides, sand, shores, boats, ships, whales, whatever it is. So we can start to create like a world of words that kind of work in the same key, and the key is S-E-A, sea. That's the thing I want to write about. I want to write something about the sea, because the sea is a magical, wonderful, terrifying place, So what words can I use around that word that live in the same world in terms of vocabulary? So my suggestion to you would be, say if you want to write a song about, I don't know, homelessness, then think about all the words that you would relate to that word, and then you've got like a bank of words that are kind of like your chords, in the key. They all belong in the same key because they're all about the same subject. And I think that's one way where you can really give your lyrics a lot more sort of cohesion to the way they kind of stick. Because they're all about the same thing. So that can really help. So think about your lyrics as having a key, If it's going for a walk, then you've got, which is topical because we might talk about that in a minute, but you've got walking, you've got walking boots, you've got a map, you've got the horizon, you've got your walking buddies, you've got the path, you've got getting lost maybe, so already, okay, we've got like a bunch of words and ideas there around that idea of walking, that can create a world for the listener, that because they're all about the same thing. And that might seem like an obvious thing, but sometimes we don't remember that when we're writing, because we might it's easy to go off in lots of different places when we're writing, which is cool as well. That's totally fine. But if you can stay focused on the idea that you started with, I want to write a song about going for a walk, the way to keep it in the same, to keep it focused, is to think about the words that work along with that you would associate with that, in the same way that if you started with a C chord, if you initially, when you're writing, depends how advanced you are with what you're doing, I guess, but you're going to want to use chords that are in the same key, because they sound good together, and they give give the listener a journey that they recognize, but that has some kind of points of home and some points of going away a little bit and coming back again. And that's, lyrics work in the same way as chords in that way, in my mind anyway. And then if you want to go crazy and be advanced and stick a weird chord or a weird word in, then you can do that, but it's more surprising if you've created that, like if you just wrote a totally random chord progression, there's sort of no surprise in that, because it's all random. And it's the same with lyrics, really. If you just write a random lyric, there's nothing for the listener to hold on to. Not that people tend to do that, but that's probably why we don't do it. So I hope that makes sense. Yeah. So think about your lyrics as being in a key. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great, Sam. I think it's really good, really practical, usable piece of advice.
Cool.
Yeah, really good. And so I guess I was thinking as you were talking there, at first I thought that method would work really well for songs where you're creating a real sense of atmosphere. And then I wasn't sure if it would work as well for a narrative song where you've got a story. But then as we were talking about, and I think that as you mentioned some of the things that are in the song we'll talk about in a few minutes, it does work just as well, doesn't it? So even if like they give the context to the narrative, whatever the narrative is, if it has got like key, if it's based around a particular thing, then having all that language throughout the narrative, even if it's kind of, it's decorative to the storyline in some way, it helps create that reality to it, doesn't it? It really kind of brings it to life. And I think it's just such a good way of getting started, because sometimes it can be like, oh, well, I want to write a song about the sea. What am I going to say? And people start trying to write lyrics straight away, I find, a lot of the time. Yeah. And it's really hard to then just come up with a set of lyrics, just come out. So like, if you're like, you've got all these different words, and then that's a great start there. You've got loads of words, and you can see how, and that when you've done that, you're probably going to have some other ideas that'll come together. You might start spotting patterns between them of like, oh, something about this will link with something about this. And it's just a really good way of getting going. Yeah,
great. That's 100% it. And it's really, that's the key thing you mentioned there, is what it creates is, it gets rid of the blank page, which is the songwriter's worst fear and nemesis, right? So we've started with something and we can go somewhere from there. So
yeah, great piece of advice, Sam. Do you do that a lot yourself with your writing?
Yeah. So if I've got to the point where I'm thinking, oh well, I'm going to write about this particular subject, then I'll think around that and think about words that I'll associate with that. And it's not to say that I won't allow for something surprising to, that I've just sort of instinctively feel like, oh, that's the right line. But I definitely would create a little pool of words that I associate with that word that I'm working on. I mean, Surprise View, that I think we might talk about, is a good example of that process. And there was definitely some of that going on for me when I wrote that.
Hi, my name is Deb, and my husband Rich was diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia at the age of 50. We were invited to write with the Swan Song Project about memories Rich has, and he wanted to include things in everyday life that mean a lot to him. We met Ben a few times to chat with what he wanted to put in the song and the type of music he wanted to put the words to. Music is a massive part of Richard's life. We were also invited to the recording studios, which he absolutely loved. The song is amazing. Everybody loves it. It's just Rich. And it means so much to us because due to his diagnosis, he will lose his voice eventually, but we will always have it. Please donate to the Swan Song Project to help more people like ourselves and write a song to keep forever.
But I'm a happy man. Love my life and do the best I can.
Brilliant. So let's move into section 3 now, where we'll talk about this song. So section 3, we talk about songs meaningful to Sam related to bereavement. So which song have you chosen for us for this section, Sam?
Well, I've chosen Surprise View, which is one of my songs. Is that egotistical? I don't know. Maybe it is. But yeah, I've chosen Surprise View. So this is one of my songs. And I guess the reason this is sort of meaningful to me is because it was actually inspired by a fan of mine who came to one of my gigs, and they messaged me after the gig and they said, "Oh, my partner, who's also a fan of yours, is ill and she's not able to make it to the show, but she's a fan, and would you possibly come and play her a song and meet her?" And so I said, "Yeah, of course, I'm going to do that." And I went and I met them, and it was lovely. I had a lovely time, and played a couple of songs and drank some tea, and sadly heard a couple of weeks later that this person had passed away. And I was really moved by that, and I was out walking sometime after that. I live in Sheffield, so I'm near the Peak District, which is where I do a lot of my walking and decompressing. And I was just thinking about this couple, and I started to create this sort of fictional story around that experience, really. And so in the song there is a couple, and they're avid walkers, and they like to go to the Peak District, and the wife in the story passes away, and every year after that the guy goes back to their favorite place in the Peak District, which in my fictional story is Surprise View, which is a beautiful spot if you've been there, which is where you can sort of look out over the Hope Valley, which I think couldn't be more poetically named if it tried, you know.
Yeah.
And it's really a song about having somewhere to remember somebody in. So it's that thing that I've heard people talk about when it comes to grief a lot of the times, which is that sense of physically being lost in terms of where is that person, you know, and having somewhere to go that you associate that person with, and being able to go and sort of be with them seems to be such an important thing for people. And so that's why in that song I've kind of put that character in that particular spot that her husband remembers her in, and that's sort of the center point for the song. And so none of that's all a fictional thing, but account that I've kind of, that was inspired by that experience that I had. So it's, you know, but it's important to me, I think, because it came from, because of what it was inspired by, and I felt, you know, moved and sort of privileged to have been in that situation, and I wanted to do something to sort of honor that experience. But again, I think also because it's one of those songs in the gig that really moves people. They connect with it. They've got their own Surprise View. They've got their own place that they go to, and I just feel grateful for the song and the fact that I can play that and people have that experience from listening to the song, and that I can give them that experience, or they can have that experience with the song. And so it's meaningful to me in multiple ways, I guess. But I guess in a way, it's, Here in the Ground was very much about me, which is okay because you're my songwriter and I can write about me. That's okay. But Surprise View was very much inspired by somebody else's situation, and then has had sort of a life of its own with the audience and so on. And that, I just feel like that's what songwriting should be for me. For me, it's like there's a generosity to it, I think, that I'm proud of, I guess, that's there. If I can be proud of that, but I think I am. So and I love the Peak District, so it's very me as well. It's got a lot of me in it too.
It's beautiful, powerful song, Sam. Let's have a listen to it now. So this is Surprise View by Sam Carr.
On Surprise View on a clear day, when the sky opens wide, I can almost hear her breathing by my side. So I come here every summer, and I walk on till I stand where we'd lay down in the heather, where I asked for her hand, and it's how I'll always see her, in a pair of walking boots, soaking in the morning sun, up on Surprise View. Now her old boots line the hallway, gathering dust, laces loose, in the same place since the day she heard the news. Oh, I was shaking, and the sunrise was the last thing on my mind. But she asked me if I'd drive her to Surprise View one last time, and it's how I'll always see her, in a pair of walking boots, soaking in the morning sun, up on Surprise View. As the sun sinks and I'm leaving, I think back to those days. Though she's gone now, she's not missing, 'cause I know where she stays.
Yeah, really, really beautiful, powerful song. It was really interesting what you were saying there. Before we started talking, I was listening to these songs. I assumed this one was going to be the personal one, and the other one was going to be the either fictional one, or I thought it might have been inspired by like a news story, something like that. But this one I really felt was going to be a real, which is a testament to how much you nailed it in terms of it feels so genuine and authentic, and and yeah, the details in it and things really bring it to life. And yeah, and I completely connect with what you're saying about the importance of places where people feel connected to people. And surprised, like I love songs about places, and like when you hear a song about that had a great place name, and you think like, oh, I wish the places near me had names like that. But, yeah, like
well,
that
you're
feel
only,
like,
you're only up the road. You can come to
yeah, and
surprise you. Yeah.
I think it's that thing when it's like streets that you walk down all the time, they don't seem that special, but then when you hear something that you're not used to hearing, so like Surprise View is just such a kind of like lovely image, isn't it, of like for a place. One of the things that I noticed with both of these songs, that I'm almost certain you wouldn't have done consciously. I don't know whether you have noticed it before or not, but both of them have start at a place and then go into a more of a home setting, don't they? So the first one starts at the graveside, and then there's a verse about being in the home as well, isn't there? And this one starts at Surprise You, and then there's a section about being at the home as well, with the boots and stuff, isn't there? Which I just thought it was kind of, but I think that's one of the things that make them work so well when there's a place, but then it's also giving you that home sense of the characters.
That's a really interesting observation. Yeah. I think and it is about a kind of home, isn't it? I think for that I mean, it's a cliche, isn't it? But what home is the people that are important to us, isn't it? It's not the building, that's the thing. Who, I don't know who said it, but somebody said grief is love without a home.
Yeah.
And I think that is that sense of rootlessness that I think that you can feel, that is so difficult about it, and makes people want to have that, I have this place where I go, that I remember the person in. So yeah, I think that's a good observation. Yeah. And that's, I think, why that's in there is because in both of those situations, I mean, that in Here in the Ground, that was actually what happened, but I think also perhaps it's the kind of when I think about I think about it a bit like a film, where you at the start of the film you might have that big shot of the city, and you might get that sense of the size of the city and the grand scale, and then you might go down onto the side, let's say the sidewalk, it's always an American film, isn't it? But you might go down onto the street level, and then we see the interaction between the people. And I think starting wide like that, on Surprise View, on a clear day where the sky opens wide. So I start in a big wide, because I think that's often a way to sort of a good place to start, like set the scene in the story, before you go into the more personal and intimate stuff in that sort of home area. But yeah, I've never noticed that about those songs, that they have that same thing. So that's really interesting. Yeah, well spotted.
Yeah, it just dawned on me as I was thinking about them. And then I was also thinking about, like, that's one of the things that makes the loss feel more potent, is when you realize it's the what's left behind, isn't it? About if you're just describing someone who's lost, it's like it's more powerful if you understand what's then remains, doesn't it? Of like, and why that loss is then important, because these things are still here. And that's one of the lines in the earlier song, wasn't it? Is it I was there, she had gone. And this one where it's those descriptions about the house and the boots that are still there and things like that, and it's those kind of images are, again, very relatable to people and very powerful. And I've not spoken to a lot of people about grief, and And in the lockdown, this was a big thing, was where people would lose people, but because they weren't seeing anybody anyway. So sometimes it's like, oh, if you lose someone who you know who lives in another country, because you're not used to seeing them all the time anyway. So it's not until sometimes it's not until you actually are in the situations where they're missing from that it hits you as much, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah,
to sort of feel the absence in a tangible way. Yeah, no, that's interesting. And one of the things, I mean, there's in Surprise View, there's that image of the walking boots. It's how I always see her, in a pair of walking boots. And then there's, in the second verse, there's the walking boots left in the hallway. And somebody came up to me at a gig and said, they said that is what happened. My husband was an avid walker, and his boots are still in the hallway, and and it hit them. The song connected with them because of that, and I think that's kind of what I was bring this back to, sort of the heady ideas of songwriting, but that's giving people those images allows them to connect with that stuff in that way. It's like, here's a real tangible thing, that we could have experienced. If you describe it in a way that makes it real and gives it to people, like, here you go, they find their own connection with that. And to me, that's really valuable, because, I didn't know that about that person, and I didn't need to, for the song to have that sort of effect for them. And I feel so grateful when that happens, because I feel like the song has done some work that I couldn't have possibly done myself. I don't know that person. It'd be very strange for me to have that such a in-depth conversation with that person, but I didn't need to, because the song kind of facilitated them having it with themselves, if that makes sense. They're going, that's a point of resonance that's happened for me, that and so I really sort of feel grateful for those moments if that happens. And I kind of see the job is just to sort of paint the pictures as clearly as you can, and if people can find themselves in that, then they will, and that's your job done, and but it's, I don't know, this is tough stuff that we're talking about, isn't it? And songs are very powerful things, but they I think they can help, but what we're talking about is really it's the stuff of life, It's getting profound now, isn't it? But it is, and it's even bigger than songs, and even more important than songs. But I think if songs can help in some way, then, and I found that they've helped me, and I know that through writing songs, people have been helped by the songs, and they've had those moments to just remember somebody because they've heard my song in that situation or whatever. And to me, that's just, I couldn't care less whether I reach, 1 billion people, whatever. If there's one person that's had that experience of an evening at a gig, where I've played to, a few people, then I think that's such a valuable thing,
Yeah, definitely, Sam. And I think it's one of the things that I always love when people who have songs like these ones that we talked about yours today, where they deal with these things. And it's, I'm sure you get this, lots of other guests I've had on the podcast who've done this, say, happens a lot, where they'll play these songs, and then people come up to them, and it gives them that space to share their story, which they might not get to share with many people at all. Lots of people don't have people that can talk to about their losses. So when you share a story yourself, it often invites people to then come and tell you about their loss, which can be incredibly powerful for people. And I was also thinking about how, we were talking about the importance of places where you can remember people, but songs, I feel, can do the same thing. So, a lot of people have songs that really remind them of people. And if you don't have a physical place where you can go and feel that with people, sometimes it is a song that does it. And so it's a wonderful thing to be able to share.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, most of the songs, my favorite songs that is the thing that comes to me when I think about them. It's the people I was with when I first heard it, or somebody that tipped me off about it, and then I really, the value of the song is really connected to the people that I've connected with. So yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thanks a lot for your time, Sam. It's been really really interesting talking to you.
Yeah, lovely to talk to you too, Ben. And I think the work that you do is brilliant, and I'm really, really grateful for you having me on to talk about what I do as well. And I wish you all the best with the work. It's really important stuff. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Sam. Really appreciate it. And I'll put all the links in the description. So I think your album comes out on the 16th of August, which I think will be before this episode comes out. So I'll put the links so people can check out the new album. And you've got some tour dates coming up later in the year as well, haven't you?
Yeah, so I'm touring in the autumn. All the dates are up on my website, and come out and have some fun.
Yeah, good stuff. Yeah, I'll put all the links in the description. Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing the new album as well. The electric guitar stuff sounds.
Yeah, great stuff. I'll make sure you get a copy. Yeah.
Nice one. Good stuff. Right, thanks a lot, Sam, and thanks for tuning in, everyone. I'll be back with another episode soon.